There's a certain kind of calm that settles in when I'm finally by myself. Not the feeling of getting away from something bad. It's more like landing exactly where I meant to be. No noise, no schedule, nothing I'm supposed to respond to. And somehow, that feels right. That kind of ease is hard to see if you need constant input to feel alive. From the outside, it can look like loneliness, like there's a gap where something should be, but from the inside, it doesn't feel hollow at all. It feels whole, just not the kind of whole that needs anyone watching. You probably know someone like this, or maybe you recognize yourself in it. The person who can spend an entire weekend alone and come back feeling charged instead of drained, not counting the hours, not waiting for Monday, just fine. I never really say I'm bored. There's always something moving in my head. I don't need plans to give the day weight. I don't need people around to feel like my time matters. And when someone asks, "Don't you get lonely?" I have to pause, because the question itself doesn't quite land. Loneliness and being alone aren't the same thing, but most people treat them like they are. Spending a lot of time by yourself is often seen as a problem, like it must mean something's off. Like if you're not restless when you're alone, you must be depressed, detached, or missing something essential. But that's not how it works. For everyone, for some minds, solitude doesn't take anything away. It gives something back. It's not a lack of stimulation. It's a shift in where the stimulation comes from. Not outside, inside. Not handed to you by the room, the phone, the conversation. Generated quietly, on its own. For nervous systems built this way, that interactivity isn't just enough. A lot of the time, it's better. People who feel comfortable alone usually have busy inner landscapes. Their thoughts don't need help getting started. Ideas spark other ideas. Questions open into more questions. Interest doesn't depend on what's happening around them, because something is always happening internally. When I'm alone, it's not empty. It's active. My mind isn't waiting for something to arrive. It's already moving, connecting things, turning them over, following threads without interruption. For someone who relies on outside stimulation, being alone feels like nothing is going on. No conversation, no shared moment, just quiet. For me, quiet is where everything starts. Time alone sharpens awareness. You begin to notice how your own thoughts form, how one idea leads into another. You can stay with a single line of thinking long enough for it to actually become something. Some ideas need space to finish themselves. This isn't pulling away from the world. It's stepping into a different layer of it. And for certain ways of thinking, that inner layer is where the real work happens. This tendency usually shows up early. Most people even just don't notice it. At first, as a kid, I could play alone for hours, build entire worlds without anyone else in the room, get lost in books, and look up to find half the day gone. Adults often read that as shyness or worry, like something is missing socially. They push for more group activities, more interaction, more noise. But the time alone was never a backup plan. It was the preference. The imagination filled the space more deeply than most conversations could, and that didn't fade with age. It just changed shape. The imaginary worlds turned into inner conversations. Solitary play turned into solitary thinking, quiet creation, and the ability to be alone without feeling restless became part of how I move through everything else. Here's what brain science shows about this kind of experience when researchers look at people who genuinely prefer being alone. Their brains don't go quiet during rest. Imaging studies show different patterns when nothing specific is happening. The network tied to inward-focused thinking stays more active, even at baseline. So even when there's no task in front of them, the mind is still working, making links, turning ideas over, exploring things without direction from the outside. For these people, unstructured time doesn't register as dull. It registers as open space. Space to think without being interrupted, to process without anyone needing something, to follow a thought wherever it goes without stopping, to explain it or defend it or adjust it for someone else. That's why people with active inner lives often say that social interaction, even when they enjoy it, takes effort. Not because they dislike being around others, but because interacting means putting their own thoughts on hold. They have to pause what's already moving inside to track someone else's words. Attention gets pulled outward when it naturally wants to stay inward. They can do it. They often do it well, but it comes at a cost. Solitude doesn't ask for that energy. That's why people with active inner lives often say that social interaction, even when they enjoy it, takes effort. Not because they dislike being around others, but because interacting means putting their own thoughts on hold. They have to pause what's already moving inside to track someone else's words. Attention gets pulled outward when it naturally wants to stay inward. They can do it. They often do it well, but it comes at a cost. Solitude doesn't ask for that energy. The culture we live in treats constant input as normal. Quiet gets filled automatically. Silence turns into background noise. Time alone gets broken up by notifications. Empty moments get framed as chances to be productive instead of reflective. Before all of this, people had long stretches of quiet, repetitive work, time alone, with their thoughts, space for the mind to drift without being tugged in a dozen directions at once. Now, boredom is treated like a flaw. Busyness is treated like proof of value. Someone asks, "What did you do this weekend?" As if rest or thought doesn't count, as if nothing visible means nothing happened. Inner life doesn't show up on the calendar, so it's treated like it matters less. Because of that, people who are actually content alone tend to hide it. They soften it. They invent plans, so they sound normal. They downplay how much they enjoyed the quiet, because saying it out loud makes other people uneasy. They learn that "I spent the weekend thinking" doesn't land as a real answer, even if, for them, it was the most absorbing thing they could have done. When they choose to be alone, it gets labeled as loneliness. When they seem at ease by themselves, others assume they're ignoring what they're missing. When they don't get bored, people think they're just better at tolerating boredom. But there's nothing being tolerated. Their minds are active, even when their bodies are still. Thought creates connection, even without another person in the room. The inner world offers a level of complexity that most external entertainment can't reach. So when someone says they're fine alone, it isn't resignation, it's preference, not settling because connection isn't available, choosing solitude because it offers something different. Room to think deeply. freedom to follow curiosity, without explaining it, time to process life, without interruption. It's not withdrawal, it's immersion. Not loneliness. Engagement. People who don't get bored alone usually aren't antisocial, they're selective. They value conversations that go somewhere. They enjoy being with people who can sit in silence without filling it. Relationships where connection doesn't require constant performance. They care about depth more than frequency. They don't need steady interaction to feel like their time means something, because meaning, for them, comes from engagement. And engagement doesn't always need another person. This is the part that's hardest to explain to people who don't experience it. The inner world isn't fantasy. It's not escape. It's where real thinking happens. It's where vague impressions turn into understanding, where experiences get sorted into insight, where questions can stay open long enough to matter. People with rich inner lives aren't detached from reality. They're closely connected to the part of it that exists in thought, meaning, and understanding. The part that only opens up in quiet is rarely talked about. What's often missed is how much real output comes from that internal focus. A lot of meaningful ideas didn't come from constant discussion. They came from long stretches of someone sitting alone, letting their thoughts run without interruption. It wasn't that solitude made them smarter. It's that certain kinds of thinking need time that isn't broken up when attention stays on one thing long enough. Deeper work starts to happen. Ideas have room to connect in ways they wouldn't if something was always pulling at them. When the mind isn't being interrupted, thoughts can grow instead of resetting. That's where original ideas tend to show up, not because collaboration doesn't matter, but because creation has two phases: taking things in and then working them through. And that second part happens quietly. Synthesis doesn't happen out loud. It happens internally, in moments where nothing is asking for attention. I've noticed that when someone truly enjoys being alone, when they never seem to run out of things to think about, solitude doesn't drain them. It does the opposite. It fuels them. That doesn't point to something missing. It points to something active. It doesn't mean they failed socially. It means they function well on their own. Their inner world carries weight. External stimulation isn't required for their time to feel full. Constant input doesn't always signal a rich life. Sometimes it just covers the absence of internal engagement. Boredom isn't about what's happening outside. It's about whether anything is happening inside. Engagement can come from conversation, or it can come from thought, from shared experiences, or from internal exploration, from what's offered by the world, or from what the mind creates on its own. People who don't feel bored when they're alone aren't enduring emptiness. They're occupied. Their solitude is filled with thoughts that need space, ideas that need time, questions that don't rush toward answers, experiences that take a while to settle. All of that requires uninterrupted time, time that belongs entirely to the internal world. So when questions come up about loneliness or boredom or what fills the day, there's often a gap in the understanding, not denial, just a different experience of engagement. The mind can be enough company. Thought can be enough activity. When the inner world has depth. External quiet doesn't feel like loss. There are still moments when connection matters, when sharing an idea feels necessary, when conversation that runs deep feels right, that doesn't cancel out the comfort of being alone. Both exist, side by side. And there are long stretches where solitude feels exactly right, where nothing external is required, where the absence of demands creates space for the kind of internal work that feels most natural. In those moments, it's clear that nothing is missing. Attention is fully placed. Engagement is already there. Some people aren't uneasy with being alone. They're familiar with what they find there. Validation isn't something they search for constantly because their internal world already responds. Boredom needs emptiness, and their minds aren't empty. Not lonely, complete, not cut off, engaged, fully present with themselves.